Hi, fifth graders. It's Mrs. Brown. I sure do miss you guys. I hope you're all doing very well. Hey, attach a picture of your bright smiling face with your homework, maybe. I'd love to see you. So today we're going to do congruent figures. Here it is. Okay, and here's what we need to know. It says here the two designs were made from the same stencil and suggest congruent figures. I'd say it's uh, three designs here. See how these things are identical, but they're just in a different place? That's all congruent means, guys. That's pretty much it, okay? Uh, these shapes right here are also congruent. It's like they were made from the same stencil. They are the same size and the same shape. They are identical. They have just been moved. Now, we talked about these are parallelograms here. Line segments could also be said to be congruent. And the way that you would say that is right here. Line segment AB is congruent to line segment CD. So if you were saying it, that's what you'd say. If you're writing it, there's a sort of an interesting symbol there. This says line segment AB is congruent to line segment CD. Now, you know I fuss about all of the details of that. So you need to make sure that you use two capital letters to name the line segments, and you put that little line segment thing over top of it. And this right here, the equal sign with the little squiggly over it, says is congruent to. That's going to keep coming up every year in math class, so you need to start getting used to that. Okay, so we talked about parallelograms and line segments. You can also say that angles are congruent. With the line segments up here, you could use a ruler to measure them and make sure they actually are the same length. Of course, with angles, we would measure those with a protractor. So you could use your protractor and measure to see that those actually are the same angle, or that they are congruent to each other. And it's very similar, the reading and the writing of it, very similar to what we did with the line segments. You would say angle E is congruent to angle F. And you would write this. We've learned these symbols before. You need the little angle symbol. And in this case, they named the angle with only one letter at the vertex, so that's fine. The is congruent to thing, and then angle F. So when you get to your homework, make sure that you write it just like that, okay? Any kind of polygons can also be congruent to each other. Remember, polygons are just shapes made out of line segments. In this case, triangles. And again, you could use your ruler and protractor to make sure that those are actually the same. You could also trace one of them and put it over top of the other one and see if it all matches up. So you would say triangle GHI is congruent to triangle JKL. And you would write it this way with the triangle symbol first. You should match up, the letters should be in the same order. See how GHI, it goes GHI, and then JKL, JKL. So you're putting corresponding angles in the same order. So try to keep those vertices matched up. Then we've got matching or corresponding parts of congruent polygons are congruent. So the word corresponding, that's another word that's going to come up whenever you study geometry. Corresponding angles, G and J are in the same place. So angle G and angle J are congruent. And on these congruent figures, angle H and angle K are corresponding angles, so they will be congruent. and also angle I and angle L. They are corresponding angles in congruent figures, so those angles are also congruent. And then you could do the same thing with the sides. Line segment GH corresponds with line segment JK, so those two line segments are said to be congruent. And you could go all the way around the triangle with the sides and do that same thing. Okay, so here's a question. I think this question is actually kind of hard. It says to write the letter of the figure that is congruent to the figure at the left. So we're looking at this one right here. Which one of these angles, A, B, or C, is congruent to the angle that I just circled? I think we all know that this is a right angle and this is not a right angle, so I think we can toss that one out. I think these two are kind of close though. If you were to get a protractor or trace and match them up, you would find that angle A is actually congruent, and it doesn't matter that it's been flipped. It's still an angle of the same measure. It is still congruent. This one's just a little bit less. If you used your protractor, you would be able to tell that. Okay, again, I think these questions are a little bit hard. Here's our first line segment, and you'd really have to measure because they all look pretty close. And so the question is A the same length? Is B the same length? Is C the same length? And the answer is yes to all of them. You would have to get your ruler out to measure that. Then you would go down here to number 3. Are any of A, B, and C, do any of them match up? I feel like we can cross this one out because it appears to be a right angle. And I don't think there are any, a right triangle, and I don't think there are any right angles in that original triangle. I think we can toss this one out because this line segment doesn't seem as long as any of the line segments here. And then when we look at C, I think that one would match up. You'd have to trace it and move it over there to tell for sure. Again, I think these questions are a little bit hard for 5th grade. All right, let's look at 4. We've got this parallelogram here. Do A, B, or C match up? Are they congruent? I think we can throw out A because it is clearly smaller. I think we can also throw out C because I think C looks a little narrower. If you measured this side right here, I think this is less. Okay, so I'm going to throw that one out. Now, what about B? What do you think? Does that look congruent? Well, think about the flipping that you did yesterday. It's okay to flip it. If you flipped this one over, would it match up with this one? And the answer there is yes, that it would. Okay, so B is the correct answer there. All right, I think this is, you're going to have to be very careful with this. It says that quadrilateral MNOP and quadrilateral QRST are congruent to each other. So they are telling you that they are congruent. Do you think that they are basically turned the same way? We just have to maybe straighten this one out a little bit to make it match up nicely with the other one. That's going to help us with 5 and 6. It says to use the congruent symbol to tell which sides are congruent. How many answers do you think there are there? That's going to be 4 different answers because all 4 sides are going to be congruent. Okay, I just made that bigger so we'd have a little bit more room to write. I'm going to go ahead and mark that those 2 are corresponding sides. So this one right here would be line segment MP, and the corresponding side would be line segment TQ, and let's keep it in that order. And since they are corresponding sides in congruent figures, they also are congruent. So there's one answer. Let's go ahead and write our statement for that. line segment PO is congruent to line segment QR. Okay, we've got two of them. Okay, you go ahead and pause the video and then turn it back on after you write the answers for the other two and check and see if you're right. Okay, so your other two answers are right here. Line segment ON is congruent to line segment RS, ON, RS, and line segment MN is congruent to line segment TS. Okay, now they want us to do the same thing, only with angles, okay? So again, our shapes are lined up pretty nicely. Angle M and angle T go together. Angle P and angle Q are corresponding angles. Angle O and angle P, or R, I guess that's an R, are corresponding angles. And angle N and angle S are corresponding angles. So we need to write those statements. Angle M is congruent to angle T. Angle P is congruent to angle Q. Angle O is congruent to angle R. And angle N is congruent to angle S. Okay, so since there are four angles, you have four statements there.